When We Disagree is a show about arguments, how we have them, why we have them, and their impact on our relationships and ourselves. Circular reasoning is like a Netflix series that never ends. It loops back on itself, repeating the same plot, without ever really setting up any tension or resolving any problem. You've probably seen it in debates, online, in politics, even in personal conversations. The fallacy pops up when the conclusion is assumed to be true. It's the argument that goes in circles, offering no new insights or evidence to move the claim forward. Circular fallacies make for great comedy. Take a classic example from the show The Office. Season 5, Michael Scott is in a fight with his employees and he declares, "I'm not a great boss because I'm a great boss. I'm a great boss because I'm a great boss." The loop here is obvious. Michael's essentially saying that his greatness is the reason for his greatness. There's no explanation of how or why he's great, just the assumption that he is because he says he is. It's a great joke because it makes for good dramatic irony. The audience, us, as well as Michael's colleagues, are the only ones aware of the fact that he's trapped in a fallacy of his own making. Circular reasoning is baked into some of our everyday talk as well. Say you're checking out at the grocery store and the cashier looks frustrated. You ask, "Tough day?" The cashier says, "It is what it is." You know what the cashier means, but that doesn't mean it's not a fallacy, a circular argument. The person's whole reasoning is that their view is valid because they hold it. Circular reasoning is a trap. It sounds convincing at first, but once you start breaking it down, there's no real foundation. It's a bit like a bad plot twist. When you figure it out, it's just frustrating because you realize it was all smoke and mirrors the whole time. And just like a bad movie script, the issue is that the writer hasn't examined the why behind the what. They have a strong feeling that something is true, that something is right, that something must be, but when pushed as to why they feel that way, they don't offer any evidence. They restate that something is true, that something is right, or that something must be. I'm Michael Lee, Professor of Communication and Director of the Civility Initiative at the College of Charleston. Our guest today on When We Disagree is David Dudrick. David is a professor of philosophy at Colgate University. He researches and teaches Nietzsche, Foucault, and he's Catholic. David, tell us an argument story.
Well, my argument story has to do with my Catholicity and my teaching of Nietzsche. I grew up in a working class, very Catholic area in northeastern Pennsylvania, and discovered philosophy when I went to college, not even really knowing what it was. And when I told my parents that that's what I wanted to major in, they were aghast. And my mother asked me, "Why not English? At least then you could write greeting cards." But I assured her that things would be okay, and I went off to Notre Dame for graduate school, where surprisingly I sort of got interested in Nietzsche and Foucault. And I really enjoyed Nietzsche because Nietzsche really took he takes Christianity very seriously. Very negative view, but he certainly thinks it's important. And when I got to Colgate, I remember having drinks with two senior members of the department, and one said something about religion, religious belief, and the other said, "Oh, careful! David might be religious." And the first, she said to me, she said, "Oh, David, you don't believe that bullshit, do you?" And I assured her that I did, although not under that description, not the way that I would describe it. And we had an interesting evening, an interesting conversation that night. It was an argument that I will not forget.
Set this up a little bit of biography first, if you don't mind, and then we'll come to the evening. So you're raised Catholic, still a believing Catholic, go to Notre Dame, a Catholic institution. You become interested in a series of philosophers, Nietzsche especially, who very much oppose the very things you believe. They take them seriously as social and intellectual forces, but at the same time come to conclusions that you yourself don't accept. Trace that out for me. Why are you interested in the things that don't seem interested in you back?
Well, let's see. It's a good question. I think that in much of my study of philosophy, I found that while there were a number of philosophers and topics that seemed to be, sort of orthogonal to my religious faith. They seemed to run alongside in some way, but
Mhm.
didn't really engage it. And as a result, I sort of, because my faith was sort of central to my thinking about the world and myself, it just sort of fell flat for me. And because Nietzsche was so passionate about it, it really I could argue with him. I could sort of read him
Yeah.
and learn some things even about my own faith. I remember having a professor in graduate school who was himself Christian and who said that Nietzsche was good Lenten reading, um, by which I think he meant that it's sort of good to reflect on these criticisms of Christianity because there are times when the criticisms are true, or at least true in of some believers at some times, and that Nietzsche may well have a point. And I think that while I didn't come to the conclusion that Nietzsche was right about nearly everything, I certainly have learned a lot from
Mhm.
from uh, from reading Nietzsche.
Well, I'm sure most listeners of this show are deeply read in Nietzsche's corpus, but I'm not. So, can you summarize at a high level what he's up to in terms of Christianity?
Well, goodness, Nietzsche. Uh, this will tell you a lot of what you might need to know. He wrote a book called The Antichrist, or The Anti-Christian, and he sort of considered himself to be the anti-Christian. And at the end of that book, he says that Christianity is the one unforgivable curse on humanity. It's of all the things that humanity has undergone, he thinks that Christianity is the worst, and he thinks that because he thinks that it has sort of sapped our will to a kind of greatness. Now, I don't think that Nietzsche is a proto-Nazi. I don't read him that way. I think he's a much more subtle thinker than that, and his criticisms as a result are not simply those of like a raving proto-Nazi lunatic, but rather of somebody who um, genuinely cares about the future of humanity and thinks that Christianity has imperiled it by
Mhm.
stifling greatness, by stifling people who might otherwise do great things. Nietzsche doesn't want Beethoven working at a soup kitchen, or Beethoven to be Saint Francis. He wants there to be cultural
Yeah,
greatness, and thinks that Christianity is a force that works against it.
gotcha. He thinks it's a religion for the guilty, for people supplicating, for people denying their own self-efficacy, for people who aren't going to dream very big, and so forth. And
Precisely.
if we can, are these sort of getting back to the evening in question at Colgate with the one of your colleagues or bosses who wasn't super fond of your faith? Is there a species of arguments that this person made that are similar to Nietzsche, or was she going for a different argument against you?
Oh, so interesting. I think that she basically, along with Nietzsche, thought that Christian faith wasn't something to be engaged intellectually. Exactly, it wasn't. It was something rather to be kind of dismissed out of hand. That it was something that was beneath, almost beneath contempt. Uh, and yet she herself was somebody who had at one time had a kind of religious faith, and I think that probably both made her somewhat in the course of the argument and conversation more understanding of where I was, but also more aggressively against it. I think that she thought that that one who had thought about these things should have outgrown it
Yeah,
by
this is
this time.
juvenile. This is a juvenile um,
That's right.
intellectual enterprise that anybody who's thought seriously about this after high school should have shed like a snake skin, right? And it almost sounds like, if I'm reading you correctly, like an accidental argument. She made an aspersion about religion in general, if I take it, not Catholicism or Christianity, but just all religious belief. the third colleague says, "Hey, careful, David might actually be one of those people," and then she maybe takes it back, maybe doesn't. How much of the argument actually takes place from there, or is it hedged and careful because she realizes she's stepped in it?
It's to her great credit that she is not somebody who is hedged and careful.
Well, good.
She's ready to jump in, and that's something that I loved and I love about her. That she wasn't content at that moment to tell me to sort of say, "Oh, yeah, and that's fine," and sort of pat me on the head and send me on my way. Um, there was something both bracing and full of I don't know. In some ways, it's a strange thing to say, but full of promise in her response. I mean, I found it to be almost comical. What a thing to say to a to a junior colleague. It's not something that I would say.
Yeah.
Um, but uh, yeah, I think that we did sort of through after that night, after I think she saw that I was pretty serious about what I was thinking about, but not in a way that was self serious.
Uh.
I think our relationship ended up sort of blossoming from there, ironically.
Let's get to the blossoming part in 1 second, and then I'm going to ask one more question, which is a difference between her approach to this and her approach to you, and Nietzsche's approach
Mm,
to the religion, which is, if I'm hearing you correctly, and tell me if I'm wrong, Nietzsche, as you characterize him, treats Christianity with the utmost seriousness and affords it a level of respect, even though he is deeply suspicious of the project. I'm hearing phrase like head patting. This is almost beneath contempt. It's not even worthy of serious criticism and time. A kind of subtle, dismissive contemptuousness, comical, even as you described her response to you. Those strike me as very different approaches to Christianity or to the possibility of religious belief.
it's a really good point, and I think that I think that her initial response to my belief was different than her eventual response. I think initially, I think that she was sort of treating it as though it was just sort of comical and ridiculous. But as we talked about it, even that very night, I think that she, due to her sort of deep commitment to Nietzsche, was willing to take it seriously. Um, she was. I mean, I think that she understood that religion and Christianity plays an important role for many people. And though I guess I could have felt patronized by that, I sort of didn't. And the fact that she called it bullshit, the fact that she was ready to see it, ready to tell me that she thought that it was false, at least that she thought it was false, did bespeak a kind of respect for me, if not for that particular belief. I mean, that she wasn't going to simply pass over it.
And she's honest about who she is and how she feels. There is
Yeah,
something respectful about that as well, affording you the honesty of her convictions and in turn receiving the honesty of your convictions in an authentic conversation.
that's just right.
Yeah.
That's just right.
Will you say more about the relationally productive outcome from this collision of ideas? You said your relationship
Well,
blossomed. How so?
it's not long after that we started talking about Nietzsche and about our views of Nietzsche and how to understand Nietzsche. And she and I ended up writing a book review together about a book that we had both read. And
Hmm.
um, eventually we wrote not just a book review but a book together. We wrote a book on Nietzsche, on Nietzsche's Beyond Good and Evil, a book that tried to interpret what Nietzsche was saying and to try to do it in a charitable way. Um, and she and I have been co-authors, and I'd say sort of close friends since, though neither of our commitments with respect to Christianity has changed in any sort of fundamental way.
Does your difference in your respective faiths, for lack of a better word, um, show or suggest any difference in the way that you approach Nietzsche or interpret Nietzsche? I know that the philosopher is one of the great misunderstood, as you mentioned, characters of our time. And so to find two people of radically different faiths and ideas who can co-author a book on Beyond Good and Evil or whatever else and find a lot of symmetry between your ideas is kind of impressive.
Well, there is this temptation. I mean, I think that I have suffered from the temptation in the past of reading Nietzsche in such a way that he becomes kind of a bogeyman or something like that, so that he ends up uh, being this like cautionary figure. And I think in some ways I still think that he is, but there was a sense in which I had to really try and understand Nietzsche on his own terms, and in terms that were charitable, and that was challenging, to be honest. I mean, that was a shift, but it was in part, I think, due to her brilliance and
Mm,
ability to sort of see things in Nietzsche, that I came to see those things in Nietzsche as well. But I think there were other aspects of Nietzsche where I was able to contribute things that she hadn't seen. I mean, it did take us a long time to write this book. I mean, it was a 9-year project, so it was a long time, and a lot of writing and rewriting. But I think it was worth it.
what do you think about, and this can be true of any kind of fighting faith, a secular fighting faith or a religious fighting faith, but think about those who say, believers shouldn't really associate with those who are,
Mm.
whether it's sinful or doubtful, or people who associate themselves with unbelieving, right? With a lack of piousness.
You know, I, I actually, I get it, because when I was invited, when she invited me to co-author this book, I hadn't tenure yet, and I had serious reservations about setting my course working on Nietzsche. And I actually spoke to a senior colleague at another institution who is himself a Christian, and said, I don't know if should I be doing this? Should I be, sort of throwing in my lot here on trying to understand Nietzsche in the most charitable way possible? And and he said, absolutely, you absolutely should, because it's important to see. It's important for all of us to be able to sort of represent those with whom we disagree in the most positive light, not in order to come to agree with them, um, but in order to maybe to disagree with them more effectively,
Right, right.
even. And so I think that, I mean, I hope that's right. Um, and I
Yeah.
understand this idea of not sort of being yoked with unbelievers in some sense or another, but I don't know that this quite counts for such a yoking.
I'm fascinated as I hear your story, and
Uh,
I'm glad you began with your childhood and growing up in the church, and then moving off to Notre Dame, and then studying philosophy as a young undergraduate, and then really dedicating your life to it and getting in debates like this with people who don't share your faith. And what I'm interested in is not on a necessarily you do this because it's productive, that you engage with alternative points of view because it leads to blossoming of relationships and it really helps you reflect. But you seem fascinated by it, compelled by the possibility of, let's
mm,
say, debate, of collision of ideas, because it gives you, and I'm going to put words in your mouth, but there's a literary critic named Kenneth Burke who talked about the value of perspective by incongruity. And so you seem to have, if I'm
oh,
reading this, a kind of magnetic charge to this perspective by incongruity. Talk about that in your life. Why do you think that is? Do you agree with my characterization of this conversation?
well, yeah, I do. Although I think you're much too kind, but I hope that that's true. I hope it's true, because I do feel this. It's funny that you're able to suss that out. I do feel almost this compulsion to try to understand these different perspectives, that are perspectives that I don't share, and to try and understand them from the inside. I mean, I think it's just it really is one of the just remarkable things about human beings that we can we can, to some extent at least, transcend our own perspective and see the world, not completely, but to see the world to some extent as someone else does, or at least from a different perspective, as you say. And Nietzsche himself was really thought that was, terribly important to be able to do that. But he's not the only one. I think that Thomas Aquinas thought that was important, and so did many other people in the Christian tradition. And I think as you say, it's not even so much. It would almost be giving me too much credit to think that it was a moral. I think it can be morally good, but my desire to do it is, sort of doesn't stem, at least initially, from some obligation or something like that. It's more like a fascination.
Yeah, there's a desire, and then we can have, I think the desire, and I share it too. So maybe that's why I was able to kind of sniff it out. But the desire is one thing, and then it's productive characteristics and why curiosity is good and the kinds of relationships that can enable and yada, yada, yada. That's another thing. So it's one thing to do the thing, to do the perspective taking because it's just good, right? Like eating broccoli is good. I don't necessarily love broccoli, but I should eat more cruciferous vegetables or whatever they're called. And I might also just really like broccoli, and it just so happens that it's good simultaneously. And that latter seems more like the case here. And so you can offer these post hoc rationalizations for why you do it because it's good, but there's some kind of ineffable desire, right? Why does the cat want to sit in the box? He's like, I don't know. Cats just like to sit in boxes sometimes.
Michael, I have to say, I find this a little discomforting because, I'm just surprised that you sort of got this, because I say to people, that I do think it's a good thing. And I think I can give like a philosophical rationale and a moral rationale. But really, it's just that I just find it I just love doing it. It's so interesting to think about, how does Foucault see the world? I mean, my goodness, that's another bridge, that I can cross, and it's just a remarkable. And I don't think I thereby imperil my belief. It's funny. I don't feel that way. I mean, I have doubts. They're more about myself or something with respect to my faith, but not about the object of my faith, if that makes any sense. I only find, I don't know. I find it almost to be somewhat, it sort of boosts my faith to be able to think this way. It's just a remarkable fact about us.
And as we close, it reminds me a little bit of the way that we can respond to things that feel stressful to us, sort of enter a fight or flight or fawn or freeze scenario, or approach it with curiosity, with the idea that stress can be productive. Or maybe we just have sort of a natural constitution or individual constitution that allows us to have a pretty wide window as it comes to stress tolerance. And so many of us, when we find our faith, our belief, our relationship, whatever it is, to be stressed, right, to feel stressed in that capacity, then we run from it, or we try to fight it, or we fawn over it, or we freeze about it. We don't approach it with charity and with curiosity. And it sounds a little bit like that's what you're doing. You're not necessarily threatened by these things. You're curious about why they believe the way they believe, and also perhaps see the possibility of, one, learning something about the world, which you're deeply curious in, but two, perhaps there's an outcome in which the very thing you already believe is strengthened by encroaching on things that are not it, and by things that deny it.
I just want to say, for the record, I have very little stress tolerance. It's just that I do have stress tolerance, I guess, with respect to this or something like that. Anything else in my life, though, I'm a mess. But when it comes to these, these other perspectives on the world, that doesn't provide me with stress. But I do think you're right that while I hate to counsel anybody to do it, I am sort of counseling people to do it. We're trying to help people to be able to enjoy this kind of thinking rather than, as you say, and to engage with their curiosity rather than to feel threatened. But I know that's a heavier lift for some people than for others, as many other things are for me. So
Well, David, I really appreciate you bringing your infinite stress tolerance on When We Disagree.
Thanks. I don't know that anybody who knows me will believe that last part, but it really has been a pleasure, Michael.
Thank you very much. Have a good one.
Thanks, you too.
When We Disagree is recorded at the College of Charleston with creator and host Michael Lee. Recording and sound engineering by Jesse Kunz and Lance Laidlaw. Reach out to us at whenwedisagree@gmail.com.